When lightning strikes the ground, the electrical field in that channel reaches something like 30 million volts per meter. The membrane inside your mitochondria is running at the same field strength. Right now. In every cell you have. That's not a metaphor I built for a video. It's listed in Harvard's reference database of biological numbers as a straightforward comparison. Today I want to explain where that number comes from, correct one thing about it that matters, and then show you something genuinely counterintuitive that follows from it. Because the practical takeaway at the end is the opposite of what most of this niche will tell you. Let's start with the number. The inner membrane of a mitochondrion carries an electrical potential of roughly 150 to 200 millivolts across it. On its own, that sounds unimpressive. A standard AA battery gives you 1500 millivolts. You'd need 7 or 8 mitochondrial membranes stacked up to match one battery from a drawer. But voltage on its own doesn't tell you field strength. Field strength is voltage divided by distance. And the distance here is astonishingly small. The inner mitochondrial membrane is about 5 nanometers thick. 5 billionths of a meter. That's roughly the width of a few molecules lined up. So you're holding a couple of hundred millivolts across a gap 5 nanometers wide. Do that division and you get about 30 million volts per meter. That's the same order as the field inside a lightning channel. Now, I want to correct something before it runs away with people, because this fact gets shared online in a form that's misleading. Your mitochondria are not lightning bolts. What matches is field intensity, not total energy. A lightning strike releases an enormous amount of energy, because it's operating across hundreds of meters and moving huge amounts of charge. Your mitochondrion is operating across 5 nanometers. The intensity of the field in that tiny gap is comparable. The scale of the event is not, by an almost unimaginable margin. So the accurate statement is that your cells maintain lightning-grade field intensities across membranes thinner than a virus. That's remarkable enough without exaggerating it. Alright. Why is that voltage there at all? This is the thing your breathing is actually for. The electron transport chain, which I talk about constantly on this channel, takes electrons stripped from your food and passes them down a series of complexes. And at 3 of those complexes, the energy released gets used to pump protons across the inner membrane, from the inside to the outside. That builds up a difference. More protons on one side than the other, and since protons carry positive charge, that difference is both chemical and electrical. That's your voltage. Then there's an enzyme called ATP synthase, and it's essentially a turbine. Protons flow back through it, down the gradient, and the flow physically rotates part of the enzyme, which is what drives ATP production. So the sequence is, food provides electrons, electrons power proton pumping builds voltage, voltage drives the turbine makes ATP. That voltage is the intermediate step in everything your body does. Now here's where it gets interesting, and where I'd like you to pay close attention, because this is a genuine correction to something widely repeated. If you search around this topic, you'll find a lot of content treating mitochondrial membrane potential as a health score. Higher is better. Charge up your mitochondria. More voltage means more energy. That's not what the research says. It's closer to the opposite. Here's the problem with a very high membrane potential. The pumps have to work against the gradient they've already built. The higher the voltage gets, the harder that becomes, and the more the chain backs up. And when the chain backs up, electrons sitting in it have time to react with oxygen directly rather than being passed along properly. That produces reactive oxygen species. The reactive molecules that damage lipids, proteins, and DNA when they accumulate. The literature is fairly direct about this. At a high membrane potential, the respiratory chain produces decreased energy and increased reactive oxygen species. So maximum voltage isn't maximum health. There's an optimum, and beyond it you get less output and more damage. And there's a related finding that I think is genuinely one of the most misunderstood things in this whole field. Most people assume that working hard damages your cells. Exercise burns more oxygen, so it must generate more of these damaging molecules, and that's the price of exertion. That assumption comes from misreading old experiments. The classic measurements of reactive oxygen species production came from mitochondria in what's called state 4 respiration. State 4 is the idling state. Substrate is available, but there's no demand, so the chain is fully charged and nothing is flowing. When researchers measured mitochondria in state 3, which is high demand with ATP being actively produced, the rate of reactive oxygen species production was described as negligible. A commentary published a few years ago made this point explicitly. It said a significant number of researchers, in both biomedical and evolutionary biology, incorrectly associate increased reactive oxygen species production with increased respiration or increased ATP demand. And the original authors had clearly stated their findings came from the idling state. So decades of assumption were built on measurements taken while the system was doing nothing. There's a beautiful direct demonstration of this. Researchers took isolated mitochondria that were idling and producing reactive oxygen species at a high rate. Then they added ADP, which is the signal that ATP needs to be made. The mitochondria switched to a low production mode. Because as ATP synthesis started, protons flowed back through the turbine, and the membrane potential dropped. Demand discharged the gradient. And the damage fell with it. So let me put the practical conclusion plainly, because it follows directly. Your mitochondria are not damaged by being used. They accumulate more damage sitting fully charged with nothing to do. The free lever today is therefore the same one that keeps appearing, but now you can see a different reason for it. Movement doesn't just build capacity over weeks. It immediately lowers the voltage that generates the damaging molecules in the first place. Walk. Take the stairs. Carry something heavy. Every time your muscles spend ATP, protons rush back through those turbines and the field across that membrane drops. There's one more detail I found fascinating, and it connects to a video I did about mitochondrial temperature. Recent work suggests that when the field gets too high, the membrane can briefly and self-limitingly become permeable to protons, letting them leak through and dissipating the energy as heat. Effectively a pressure relief valve, protecting the system from its own field strength. Alright. Where does my own recommendation sit today? This is the one day where I have to be careful in an unusual direction. COQ10 is one of the carriers in the electron transport chain, the chain that pumps those protons and builds that voltage. Levels of it do decline as we get older. That much is straightforwardly true. But notice what I'm not saying. I'm not telling you a supplement raises your membrane potential. Because after everything I just explained, that wouldn't even be a selling point. A higher potential means more reactive oxygen species and less efficient energy production. If someone sells you something on the basis that it charges up your mitochondria, they either don't know the research or they're betting you don't. So what I'll say is narrow and true. COQ10 is a physical component of that chain. That's all. The link in the description below is an affiliate link to Mitochondrial, which is PQQ and COQ10, with a 90-day money-back guarantee. And if you want more of the version where the impressive fact comes with the correction attached, subscribe. This video is educational only and it's not medical advice. Talk to your doctor before starting new or more intense exercise.